In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
All right, welcome everybody. This evening we have a returning guest, Robert Anthony. He's been involved with ancient and biblical studies for over 12 years. He's an occultist. He's an author of an upcoming book, The Consecrated Evil. You can find all of his stuff, all of his work at whathasbeenwritten.com. Robert, thank you for returning. I appreciate it. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, what's up? Doing good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I hope I didn't miss anything with that with the intro. You're quite a character. Your blog or your website is very in depth, and you have an encyclopedic knowledge of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight. And I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's just so many topics to cover when you're dealing with actual occultism. Aside from the blog, I do have an upcoming release on necromancy entitled Burial Magic, which I was supposed to get out a little earlier in the year, but due to other things I'm involved with, there's been some time. But nonetheless, just on the blog and my platforms such as Instagram, I've been producing stuff, videos, and really fundamentally drawing the distinction between the actual occult and basically just the mainstream nonsense that just coats the halls with a lot of this stuff, because a lot of these people claiming to be into the occult basically just turn things into kind of like a Todd Bentley kind of crusade where everyone's just getting scammed for their money and stuff like that. So I deem it appropriate to bring the actual essence of the traditional occultism out.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And before we get into it, since we're kind of talking about it now, I know that you kind of reject this. I think, I don't want to speak for you, but the reason that I appreciate your website and I appreciate you is that I think that you reject this linkage that occultism shares with this new age movement, or this modern occultism movement. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many branches and varieties of them. I mean, it just seems like, a lot of people think the occult comes out of like the 1800s, and that's like an anachronistic perspective, though, because they'll go to authors like Blavatsky and Crowley and Levi. But if you look at all those authors, the central practices of like alchemy and divination and, the Kabbalah, all that stuff cuts back to the ancient world. And so that's why I have, even with my one website, ancientoccult.com, bringing it back to the roots where the essence is. And, a lot of people, it just seems like they're just a bunch of oxen following along whatever they've been told instead of actually looking at the essence of the material. And so that's why a lot of the stuff I document, it just almost instantaneously drives people away due to cognitive dissonance, which is the opposite of the occult. The occult's about advancing in knowledge, learning, self-correcting, the exaltation of the stability of the mind. Some people, they just kind of get carried by the wind, and they're very simple-minded. And so if I say something that's against whatever they think the occult is, running out the door is not the right perspective. They should look into it and see if there's substance to it.
Yeah, so I see this new age movement, or this underpinning of like flower power or hippies. And, I don't want to get into politics too much, but that's linked to the left here in America. I know I'm kind of just picking like a little microcosm of the kind of people that you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So and it's weird now because it's sort of evolved on us again. There's a new idea out there. It's not just New Ageism anymore. There's this thing called Hyperionism.
Right.
And I learned about this on your website. I hadn't really heard of it before, but this Hyperionism is it's popped up and it's selling or promoting like globalism as occultism. It seems like, is that kind of how you would read it?
Well, I mean, Hyperionism is ran by basically this guy who calls himself Morg. And, usually I wouldn't even write an article focusing on exposing in particular, a false occultist. Usually I just kind of give like a general rundown of the nonsense that basically every one of them holds to. But, with him and also with another guy, Tarl Warwick, these guys just have such a massive reach, so they're coming claiming to be occultists basically and presenting it. I produced articles on both of those gentlemen. The Tarl one's kind of personal, though, because me and him go back years ago. We had a debate. He basically made a video on me first, ranting for 20 minutes about it just to contradict himself. And so, I wrote the article on him. He's basically a political speaker. He just kind of sneaks occult videos into his political following. And has a bunch of edits on Amazon. With Hyperionism, though, Morg, I've seen on Instagram, this guy, I've seen videos popping up, didn't think much of it. It's just, the typical stuff. But when you see just how massive of a reach it is and a movement, and you actually look into some of the teachings, you could really point out the nonsense if you're studying the actual occult.
Yeah, so like I found it online and I went to it, and it's like, he even calls it like a new world order, or like a one world order. And it's like, the concept is a new age of unity. And I'm like looking at it and I'm like, oh my God. And it's all like this, we just need 10% of the world, to shift this paradigm, and we can all live in this weird utopia. And I'm like, I don't know, like this sounds a lot like international socialism, to me, with like this kind of car wax of occultism, slapped onto it. And this guy, the dude you're talking about, like he used to try to engage me on Instagram a few years ago. And
really?
I had never knew that this was like his gimmick. I had known him from that Freaks TV show on like Discovery or whatever, where he's like stapling himself or whatever he was doing. But yeah, so I thought that was super interesting. And, now, we're getting like these $1 trillion bills passed and no one's even reading them or voting on them. And all these like progressive sort of, talking points and plans and programs are getting shoved in there. I kind of made me think like of this sort of one world Unitarian occultist, kind of, thing. And I know that you'd written about it, so I just kind of wanted to get your point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, just for some examples, with him, like I said, you got these guys coming out with massive Macy Day parade followings claiming to be in the occult, and the people just like a bunch of just numb cattle follow along. But like I said, if you actually studied in the practices, you see some of the stuff guys like him say. It's just utter nonsense. For instance, he just completely rejects necromancy. He may not admit it, but when you look at the website, one of the quotes I read, he says basically like, you never die, and he separates the human being from the body like at death. First of all, that's a rejection of animism, first off, right? It also denies the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, like in Virgil's The Aeneid, the very focus of it is the corpse and the burial. Not to mention the Egyptians with the mummification process. But, basically, when you deny necromancy, it's such a central point of the occult, the bridge just collapsed at that point, because it's the whole micro-macro cosmic comparison of the solar ecliptic focus, basically the light out of darkness paralleling life out of death. But the whole essence, especially in ancient ideology, is that when one dies, their body returns to the dust from which it came, their breath into the air, and hence the heavens. And so this is how you have the as above, so below aphorism tying in. It's like to break it down to the elements, basically like with the pentagram. But to deny all that and say, yeah, the body, never mind that, this is what it just denies all that. And so this butchers the occult in half, chops it in pieces. So I point that out. There's a few other things I was able to catch. First of all, his handling of the Bible, is just a chainsaw massacre, as with many people. I mean, they just treat it like some Christian object. You know, by the way, how anyone could claim to study the occult, like Eliphaz Levi, the Kabbalah, you know, all these things, the basis is the Bible. You know, I mean, the Bible is not a Christian source. It's a central focus of the occult in disguise, is how I phrase it, because all these things are like the Lesser Key of Solomon. It's all rooted in the Bible. And you'd have to just be completely blind to not see that in studying like Levi and all these others. But people do it 99% of the time. So that's why I continuously repeat that, just to get it into people's heads that when you're thinking of the Bible, don't think this, oh, come on, you know, Jesus, my sins. Jesus is a solar deity. This is an enigmatic compilation of documents, you know, of alchemical breaking down of, you know, perspectives and stuff. To read it like it's a Time magazine and be like, you're just getting duped by Christianity. Don't be gullible. Study the text for yourself. So, you know, all these things. So that's what I point out.
Yeah, so you mentioned, you know, we've done Key of Solomon stuff on the show for a long time now. And when I talk to other people about, you know, this ceremonial magic, you know, or the Goetia or whatever word you want to use for it, people get shocked when I'm like, you know, like I was being interviewed about it on a podcast and the person interviewing me was like, well, you know, do you kind of have to believe in God, like this whole mythology or whatever to do this? And I was like, well, you know, in specifically in the Keys of Solomon, like what you're doing is you're calling on these evil spirits and then you're begging God to help you control them. Like, you know, you're yelling out like these 72 names of God. You're trusting God to save you from these things that you're, you know, summoning up. So yeah, I think that you probably would have to believe in, you know, some form of it, you know, just to go to your idea of how even the Keys of Solomon are linked to the Bible. They're irrelevantly linked, like you can't get away from them. That's how linked they are.
Well, yeah, and even right there, like you just said, the definition of God is really where people get thrown off. The ancient idea of deities was nature itself, the sun, the moon, stars, mountains in certain cases, or trees, like Daphne and Metamorphosis of Ovid. But basically, like, yeah, people get this kind of like William Lane Craig kind of idea of God, where he's just like a Simpsons character you could go to or whatever. And they turn, like you said, the Ars Goetia, yeah, they turn them into like Pokemon characters too. I mean, you know, the underlying text of the Key of Solomon is a testament of Solomon. It's astrological in nature. It's like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It's enigmatic. The demons are stars or constellations. You have the repetition. It's brought up, the esoteric dragon. People read that and they just turn it to a cartoon. So, you know, that's another problem. But of course, the focus is with God, with power. I mean, because Elohim and El are rooted in the Hebrew term for power. You know, it's rooted in there, and you could see it. I document a usage in Genesis on my website of it, but basically like, yeah, so that's what it is, or just wisdom itself, like the proverbial literature. You know, it's like Apollo in the Aeneid. He basically possesses the Sibyl like some kind of puppeteer tactic and speaks through her, but it really is an emphasis of the possession of wisdom upon the Sibyl. How divination is not a supernatural practice, it's an observational one, it's a discipline. And so all these things are rooted in this kind of thinking. But yeah, people just like butcher it and turn God into like, you know, like I said, something else. So that's another problem.
So if I could just kind of slow you down and bring you back up just a little bit. In the Keys of Solomon and Testament of Solomon, you pointed out that they were astrological. It's based on astrology, astrological text. Is that why, in your opinion, is that why, you know, you have to find like the days and the phases of the moon and the time, like the timing is so important when you're doing these, when you're looking at these rituals? Is that a way to figure out where the stars are that you're trying to communicate with or work with?
Well, you know, the way astrology works is, like I said, cuts back to the Trismegistus aphorism. As above, so below. It's not just a slogan you put on a T-shirt, although people turn it into that. Basically, like I said, you understand that these things correlate. As Cavendish would describe, the Earth is a machine, and this cuts in, like I was saying before, the alchemical and microcosmic ideology. So basically, yeah, like the stars, the moon, the alignments, all irrelevant on the Earth. Now, you can not only just see this with that, but also in comparing, well, the Bible with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I mean, the Book of the Dead, you got the mention of the 7 shining ones, which is Ursa Minor, but that correlates with the 7 angels, which are identified as stars in the Bible, in Apocalypse, or the Book of Revelation. So you could see the comparison there with that, but it also just expands with just even like in Deuteronomy, you'll have like these curse listings and it's just books of magic stuffed in there. But basically you have this mention of where the body's left on the tree, which is a crucifixion, by the way, in Galatians. And it says not to leave the body up on the tree at night. Well, what does that have to do with it? Well, obviously, because the sun is not out at night. So this whole thing, again, correlating with necromancy and the sun, like I was saying. It's in the very context of the dead. So these texts hint towards that. Another one's the Odyssey, Book 11. Basically, you have the catabasis and the dead in the underworld, but right before it, you have this leaving of the sun, but in the sky. So it's solar ecliptic. So repeatedly, the sun is correlated with the dead. And again, this is all due to the comparison I was talking about.
Okay, so like most people would, I imagine most people, if asked about what necromancy is, they would just say like it's just when you are communicating with the dead on some level. But you brought it up a couple of times, and you haven't been talking about it like it's just communicating with the dead. Can you kind of unpack your idea of it for us?
Well, yeah. I mean, the ancient idea of it is, people turn it into Beetlejuice, where it's just the dead people are just alive people, all animated, walk around. Now, the esoteric texts speak of the dead talking, but these are enigmatic texts. They have meanings behind it. I believe it was last time I was on your show, I gave the example in 1 Samuel 28 of the Hebrew occult writings, where basically with the Witch of Endor, the medium, you read the story, but when you read it like the newspaper, you're not going to catch the fact that, besides the fact that it's an Ouroboros, he falls on his own sword at the end, taking his own life like Jesus. But you do have this whole thing where like Shaul and Sheol correlate, and his name actually means death. And so there's all this meaning behind this stuff. The corpse itself speaks inanimately, and this cuts into, like I said, animism. So yeah, it's divination through the context of the dead, but to take all these esoteric stories and just turn it into like, yeah, dead people are just, like the Sixth Sense, go hang out with them, have a couple beers, hey, watch the game with them. That's not the understanding of the ancient ideology. The depiction of communicating with the dead is through, basically, it's put in all sorts of senses. I mean, you have these messages of, like in the Bible, when people would die, I think it was Eli's son, it would be a message to them, the very death. You have this kind of context where the corpse is the focus. Like I said before, Morgue, he just turns it into like, yeah, forget the body. It don't matter, basically, where, all these cultures put the very focus on the corpse itself. And that's how the dead speak. It's not in the sense of just like a cartoon, but as Job chapter 12 says, the earth speaks. And that's what divination's all about, collecting knowledge and information through the mystical earth. It's not a secular earth, it's a mystical place. So this is how the communication is derived. And when one dies and their body becomes unified with the earth itself, the earth speaking is the dead speaking at that point. And so it's much more spiritual, in other words, than people make it. They just turn it into a physical practice that has no meaning.
Yeah, so in these cases where they're talking to these dead corpses, they're not actually talking to the person that used to inhabit that body per se. They're talking to like another realm, using that body as like a medium.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the body speaks inanimately. It's like the display itself communicates, like in the Egyptians, for instance, their focus is very put on the corpse itself with like the mummification or the tombs. And really just the context of the dead itself teaches, like I said, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. This is necromancy. You have all this wisdom, but it's in the context of death, because the ancients would understand that you could get light out of darkness. That's why a lot of their writings are so focused in like this like brutal stuff. Like, you'll have like Cronus eating his own child, and someone may read this like, oh, what's this? But they would see the wisdom and light out of such brutal, death. And this is how they would write mythology, so as to derive wisdom. Now, there's many different practices of divination. There's ornithomancy, divination through the flight, actions, and noises of birds. There's extispicy, divination through animal entrails. The necromancy seems to be a more broad focus and central, because, like I said, you have that connection with the sun and the darkness, life, death, light and darkness. So that's what it cuts into.
Yeah. So I think that you have some experience with this how do you help me out again? How would you say? Yeah. Can you tell that story?
Well, that's just a regular practice for myself. Like I said, divination's not a supernatural practice as many people misapprehend. It's observational. It's just like you could predict the future of an eclipse by observing the astronomical occurrences and the alignment and stuff. When you understand the Earth, not through a secular perspective, not a mundane, basic perspective, not a Christian perspective, but through the occultist perspective, you could see that all these occurrences, when you have the micro versus macrocosm, instances relating to one's life, whether it's birds or just certain occurrences, you can now collect information through these things so as to derive information about the bigger picture of matter. So yeah, with the birds, I've documented, for instance, an ornithomatical omen taking place actually at a house I was staying at. I got some of the photography on my website, and you could just see this it's really just the focus of like a unique occurrence, not just like, hey, there's a bird, but there's a unique event. In the Odyssey, the two eagles tear each other, and basically it's a sign that he's returning. Someone may wonder, well, how do you get that from that? Well, again, it's this study of correlating patterns in nature so as to derive information. So, these things can have to do with numbers, like Jesus says with Peter, with the rooster, with the crowing, the amount of times, and all these things. And this is ornithomancy put to practice, as it was done by the Greeks and Romans, for instance. So it's another way to collect spiritual information on this earth.
Yeah, so we're in the grips of the pandemic right now, and I was on the road the other day, and just this one wild turkey was just walking across the street, and I was just like, well, I guess this is like the story, like in Paris, like the swine are coming back to taking over Paris, and you hear these stories about these wild animals taking back over these places because humans aren't there anymore. But I was like, what is this deal with there's just this one wild turkey just walking across the street up here? And then I was on your website doing show research, and I was like, oh, I should bring this up and see if he's got any insight about this one wild turkey walking across the street. I thought it was weird. It was like something out of Twin Peaks for me, anyways.
Well, yeah, if I could just add to that, some people kind of turn like omens, which are very animal focused, like with birds and others, of course. Even in the passage I gave before, Job chapter 12, about speak to the earth and it will teach you, right around there, it's also the beasts will teach you. And again, this just the depiction of the omens. But some people just turn, the omens basically into like a dollar menu, like, oh, did that eagle hit the house? Okay, that means this is going to happen. It's not really how it works. It pertains particularly to the individual. It's not just like one type of action from a bird applies in all cases. It's very particular because, like I said, one's life, their thoughts, even when you understand like the Trismegistus and the mind is all and all the mental magic, will relate to the outer picture. And so these are the kinds of things it also cuts into.
Yeah, so this is like when people talk about dream interpretation, and I've never signed on to like the big book of 101 dreams. Like, what is it when you dream of a penny? What does it mean? Because like to everybody, they assign different meanings to every different kind of symbol. Like you could do like big archetypical sort of generalizations, I guess, but to me, it just has always seemed like a wasted effort, to try to interpret anyone else's dream for them, because it's something that's deeply personal and they assign this stuff to them. A lot of ways, it's like the tarot card kind of stuff is like you're plumbing your own depth psychology with these things. That's the kind of the way that I see it. And that's kind of, I think, what you were just talking about as far as like, did the eagle hit this house? Well, then what does that mean?
Right. And, and with tarot cards, it's interesting you bring that up because, tarot kept in its Eliphaz Levi context, cartomancy, is a wonderful thing. It's just another form of divination that could be used. But when you really dig into these apps and the hashtags and just the fake occultism, the mainstream stuff, these people turn it into a trading card game. Same with Ouija boards. It's just Monopoly. So it's just like a trend they turn it into. And that's what I'm totally against because there's no substance to it. Some people may even say, well, with tarot cards, we can't predict your future, but we can give you options. I mean, I could go to the 90s, get a TV guide and give you that. That's not divination. Divination, you can predict the future, but not in some Wizard of Oz kind of like context. From, like I said, you could predict eclipses or certain events going to happen based on the natural observances. So this is what it cuts into. One thing, not just apply to everybody. It would pertain to the individual. You'd have to get a lot more information with that kind of, like you're saying, dream interpretation, what's going on in their life, with all sorts of things, relatives, occurrences, all this information. If you were to study that, then, you could derive certain information for that individual.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Okay. So you have already done it. You pointed out this solar lunar connection to like a lot of your work. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that a little bit more. So here, let's narrow it down a little bit. Since we're still in Pentecost, maybe you can kind of start with the resurrection of Jesus.
Well, it's in the morning. It's relevant with the sun. Like I said before, with the crucifixion taking place, it's the rising of the sun, of course, and then you have the death where, of course, darkness occurs. I believe it's in Luke's gospel. So, again, you have all these. They're really particular to get that in there in the text, you'll notice. And this is all the evidence, by the way, the esotericism. The Christians read the Bible just like this. Like I said, it's a very physical approach, but you'll have these things where, like, Jesus will make it specifically clear, the character Jesus, like, listen, no one takes my life from me. I take it from myself. I will take it up again. Why? Because it's an Ouroboros. They got to get that in there because these are occult cultures, So this is what it goes into with the resurrection. You have it in the morning. You have the rising of the sun. The zeitgeist will touch on a lot of the general stuff. I really cut a lot deeper into it because people just hold a kind of commercial perspective. I mean, it's a motif. Jesus comes riding on a donkey. When you understand the chariot in the sky motif, Surya, Hinduism, Elijah, Helios, the ancients' idea of transportation was chariots, horses, and donkeys in certain cases. So since they understood the sun as traveling across the sky each day, then, they would display it that way in their mythology. Oh, it's a chariot racing. And Psalm 19 even notes this, by the way, the sun ready to run its race. But, a Christian reading that, race, what's it talking about? Because they're not studied in the occult, which is what the Bible's all about. But like I said, with the donkey one, it's interesting because it cuts back to 1 Kings 13, where you have this very specific story of these two prophets, the opposition, where basically the guy's not allowed to go and eat, and the prophet lies, and he says, just come do it. And basically he goes and he gets killed by a lion in the story. But the lion very specifically doesn't eat the guy. And that's very key when you understand the alchemy of it, because he is correlated with the donkey, like I said, so this notes him as the sun, like with Jesus and the chariot, like I just said. And then he's brought by the other prophet on the donkey to the tomb, very similar to the Jesus stories, necromancy, mythology. So this is where this stuff all cuts into. It's not just some random meaningless story that the Christians turn things in. It's all this alchemy involved, because if you're familiar with the lion eating the sun in alchemy, one of the more popular depictions, that's the vitriol and the breaking down with the base metals and purification of the gold. Well, this is exactly what that kind of story cuts into, the same motif. So, those are some examples of it. Like I said, the Odyssey, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it's another one. I mean, Ra is the self-begotten one. Another Ouroboros like Yahweh birthing himself in Proverbs 8 with wisdom, but you'd have to correlate that with 1 Corinthians 1:24 because Jesus is wisdom. But it's the sun again. Psalm 84, Yahweh is the sun. Joshua chapter 10, he identifies Yahweh as the sun in the sky. And at that point, if I could just sum with this, is that people might think like, wait a minute, the Bible condemns sun worship. Now you're saying it exalts it? Yes, this is the power of opposites. More evidence of the occult in the Bible. All these opposite notions, witchcraft condemned, sun worship condemned. They would write this stuff coded like that where the very opposite is what should be done. This is seen explicitly in Genesis with the serpent, for instance, where Yahweh, the very opposite, where he says, if you eat it, you will die. Just the opposite was true. They didn't die. And so this is how they would write a lot of things like that. So that's why it's no surprise to come across a lot of the condemnation passages or the warring of perspectives, as I call it.
Yeah, and it's like, we have to also note, this is something that you note over and over again, is that, these weren't written to be like one huge story. Like, there's threads here and there woven in and kind of slapped together. Like, Genesis is riddled with this. Like, I think biblical scholars think that there's up to like 3 or 5 different narratives kind of smashed together into Genesis. So you get a lot of like weird, contradictions just within the books themselves, not even considering like one book to the next book, what kind of different shit changes, in there, right?
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of distinctions in the text, It's very ambiguous, and especially just to make matters worse for the Christians is once you cut into the Septuagint or the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Paleo-Hebrew minus in the vowel pointings, because then you're going to get all these other meanings, like I said with Saul. You take away the vowel pointing, his name is the same as Sheol now in Hebrew. He means death. That fits with the story. The Septuagint, I just noted a moment ago how Yahweh births himself like Ra in the Book of the Dead, the Egyptians. That's an Ouroboros, but if you read the Septuagint rendering of Psalm 110, it notes something specifically that the Masoretic doesn't. It says, he says of God, in the Lord in the passage, before the morning I birthed you, but you don't get that in the other Bible. In fact, there's a lot of stuff in certain Bibles you don't get in others, and even in the ones that may agree, like you said, you'll find, opposing things in that and all these, like, odd things. That's why with like last time I was on here, we talked about like with Moses, the horned mountain deity and all this stuff. You'll get all these mixing of details where, in the Exodus is where the Hebrews start writing, and basically you have all these horn correlations and sacrifices. Then when you go back to Genesis, which is very anachronistic, like I said, the Septuagint even puts the Assyrians in the Garden of Eden with Adam before they existed. But, you're not going to get that in the other Bibles. That's in the Septuagint again. You go back and you see all these, like, animal sacrifices, like the one with Abraham or, like with Cain and Abel. And they look like they're later insertions when they were doing more of the Axis Mundi-based mountain worship, like in Exodus. Because if you take away those instances of sacrifice in the Genesis stories, the stories still flow. I'll give one example with Noah. God tells him to preserve the animals so, they can repopulate. Once he gets out the boat, he kills it, and then this is the reason that he's never going to flood again, because he smells the aroma. Like, if you remove those things, the stories would still flow. He comes out, the animals are there. So this is like big evidence when you kind of do the detective work on it that these, show evidence of later insertions as well.
Yeah, and some of this stuff points to like I guess it's kind of what you're talking about, astrotheology, right? Like you mentioned briefly a second ago about Zeitgeist.
Yep.
Yeah, so whether they were originally the horns of Taurus on Moses, or the whatever age the sacrifice belongs to, or like the fish in Pisces, whether that was original or added, it kind of makes you think about the occult origin of that kind of stuff. At least it makes me think about it.
Yeah, the astrotheology is just coded not just throughout the Bible, but all these ancient cultures, because they got the stars, the sun, the moon. It's the main show. So with these things, I mean, with the Moses horns, there's this whole dispute over like if they're razor light or horns. It's the same Hebrew is used for horns in the Psalms, I believe. So it does mean horns, but the key there is that the tip of the mountain, the point, the horn, because the entire context is like the horned animals burnt, and then you have this whole thing with would later be understood as volcanoes, but at the time was just their idea that Yahweh touched the mountain and it smoked, like Psalm 18 says. Yeah, the whole thing with Moses meeting Yahweh on the mountains, just the sun setting at the mountain's peak. It's just a common occurrence of like a mountain-based tribal culture where they just see the sun kind of setting and resting at the mountain's peak. It's also in the Egyptian Book of the Dead where Ra goes to the mountain. So that kind of stuff, of course, cuts into the astrotheological ideology. With the sun, the moon, the stars, children are a common understanding of just stars. Like Abraham, his children will be as the stars, or in Genesis with Joseph, with the dream. Even with like the story with the bears, with Elisha and the 42 children, that's astrotheological. The children are stars. And really, that's an example, like I document my work on spells and hexes on my website, where you have this story of that occurring is an attempt at controlling the phenomena in the heavens. And you'd see these things with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. You'd see these things with all these different stories. And that's really how spells and hexes work when you're dealing with the occult. A lot of these people claiming to be into witchcraft today turn it into just like pouring a salt on a candle and saying some stuff. I could go cook ramen noodles and do something like read the instructions and it would be like, but the meaning is actually the understanding of the aphorism. Once again, as above, so below. In essence, the cursing of the stars above, like you'll see this battle with the stars kind of notion in ancient text, was in essence an attempt to return blessings beneath, the opposite. So this is how this stuff ties in.
Yeah, so that reminds me of like the Tower of Babel. I don't recall seeing anything about that specifically on your website, but we talk about these axis mundis and we talk about these mountains and like these places where the mundane or the profane meet the sacred or the divine, and Nimrod building this tower to get to the heavens might have something to do with like this kind of astrotheological stuff that you're talking about. I'm wondering if you'd ever looked into that at any great length.
Well, yeah, it sounds like another example, like you just said, the Axis Mundi, which also expands to the Yggdrasil sort of tree in Daniel chapter 4, like in Norse mythology. By the way, a lot of people do this whole thing with paganism where they're like, the Bible's not pagan, that's an Abrahamic religion. But then they'll turn around and be like, the Bible stole its teachings from paganism. In other words, it's paganism,
Right,
I mean, basically, a lot of these pagans are basically just Christians in disguise, because that's what the Christians say, that the Bible's not paganism. But it's the same stuff. You got the Yggdrasil tree. You got Jesus sacrificing himself on the tree like Odin. You got, the Axis Mundi. With Babel, definitely, because here's the thing. The ancients don't understand the earth from like a modernistic cosmology, sort of perspective. So their local region is the earth, like the ends of the earth are the coastlands, where the water is, So basically, like the highest mountain, or like they may depict things like a tower and all sorts of stuff, was basically the gateway to the heavens. And the closer you are to the heavens, the closer you are, to things like the sun and stuff like that. So, yeah, that definitely ties into that. But with that story, you got like Genesis 11 where Yahweh comes down and confuses the people.
Right.
But then you'll have like in Corinthians where it's like God is not of confusion. So it's another one of those examples. But yeah, he comes down as a man, unlike the Christian idea of God, the biblical God's coming down depicted as a man, confusing the people.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mentioned Pentecost, and that's what happens in the biblical Pentecost is instead of confusing them, God or the wind rushes into the room and lets everyone speak all different kinds of. It's kind of like a blessing rather than a curse, but he's like doing the same shit,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff in the New Testament just kind of repeats the Old Testament stuff or flips it on its head.
Yeah.
I call it a flip of the script and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'm not done with you with this lunar solar ecliptical stuff because I ran into this thing in your Demons and Spirits article about the eclipse business with the Book of Tobit and also in the New Testament, and they both have to do with fishes. And so I feel like I gotta contextualize this a little bit. A few years ago, there was a big thing about the Revelation 12 sign, this astrological sign that happened, where it was like a woman stepping on a dragon's head and all of this. And then like the next month there was a eclipse, and people would start talking about this sign of Jonah was this eclipse. And we did like a whole episode, reading all about Jonah and talking about him. And he was like been swallowed up. And that was like this idea of this, eclipse, even though the text never said, hey, it was an eclipse. The idea was that Jonah was the sun being eclipsed by this, fish or this whale or whatever. So I was hoping that you could maybe talk about these two other stories, or even the Jonah story too, and about like how that is kind of like a code of an eclipse or an ecliptical lore.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's Jesus equates himself with Jonah, in the New Testament. Right there, you got the evidence he's a son, because Jesus is a son, because he's Yahweh, Psalm 84:11. So, yeah, he's the son, but you got to see that the fish that swallows Jonah, the same word for fish in the Septuagint is the same word for Leviathan, which is the dragon. That cuts right into the whole solar dragon kind of thing, where the sun, it varies. You got like Tiangu in Chinese lore, where he goes and swallows the sun, and I think they like shoot arrows at him and he spits it out. But you'll notice in these stories that he goes into the fish, he comes out. Jesus goes into the tomb, he comes out. The sun goes into the darkness, comes out. It's all the same thing. Even Daniel, he goes into the den, he comes out. And basically that's how you see it's just all the same motif, just told a different way. And with Tobit, that's the same as Matthew 17, where Jesus tells Peter to go and get like the coin out of the fish's mouth. And Tobit, he takes out like its insides and burns it, and the smoke drives the evil spirit away. And basically, the coin drives the tax receiver away.
I love it.
Same thing again.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say that's what it is, and I think the fish even goes to eat him in that story, but then it continues with that. So this is esotericism. These are ancient texts. This is the occult. This is what it's about. And for people, it's a shame that so many people have been tricked and bamboozled by the Christian church to think the Bible's some kind of, like happy Jesus kind of book where Jesus is coming talking about all this brutality, and all this stuff fitting with necromancy, like I said. And you see all this coded type of scenery and this sort of stuff. So it's a real shame. But of course, Eliphaz Levi didn't get duped. He was all over the Bible, especially in transcendental magic. And really just today, these kind of like scamming fake magicians and occultists, you see, Levi warned about all this stuff, spoke of the quackery involved with the pseudo magic, and we're seeing a lot of that today, actually, in this kind of setting of a bunch of people.
Yeah, so you had mentioned Leviathan being equated with this fish or this whale, and it's interesting because we brought up a long time ago. We talked about Leviathan, and actually in one of my graphic novels I kind of go over the story of Leviathan. It's kind of like missed in the actual Bible. Like the God tells this story of how he fought, like he fought Leviathan, and but it's like missing out of the where it should be in the chronology. And he says a lot of the stuff that you just talked about, like with the Chinese shooting hooks and stuff at these dragons. Is like God is like, did you put a hook in Leviathan's nose? Like so Job asks him this question, and God just goes off on him. Like he goes off on him and starts asking him about all these things, and it actually kind of ties into Norse mythology, which we were just talking about as well, where it's like Thor, who's also this sky god who controls thunder and all of this stuff, winds up fighting a serpent. And that's another one of these things that just kind of goes around and around. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the Leviathan story in Job.
Yeah, well, Job, again, astrology, he's bringing up about in the sky a little before he starts getting all the animals. And And then Leviathan's just spoken about with his eye like the morning star and all stuff. And Leviathan's a river in the Psalms, I think like Psalm 74 or whatever. And, that's really where people don't catch it. Last time I was on, we spoke, and God speaks in the Psalms about how he fed Leviathan to the people. But if you go back to what Moses, he fed them the water, and that's what Leviathan is as well. So this is more nature-focused type of stuff. Like I said, they do this with rivers, with trees, with mountains, with the sky, the sun, the moon. And so this is how these things correlate. So, yeah, the slaying with the dragon, all this stuff's depicted like in Isaiah, God slaying them and all this stuff, and really shows his control, the power and the wisdom dominant over, other aspects of nature. It may cut into what people may render as pantheism, all as God, although, I don't consider myself that per se, because I don't think that everything in nature is necessarily equated on the same level of majesty. Other things, even Jesus says, like the Father, I go to him, he's greater than I, So you got different parts of nature which may be subjected to others and all these other things. And so that would fit also with Yahweh slaying the dragon. And then also in Revelation 12, the dragon there's more like water spewed out, and he goes to devour the child, which is the sun coming out, So that's another one.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like man's struggle with nature, just kind of like mythologized, I suppose. All right. Well, hey, is there any kind of parting things that you want to talk about, or any kind of plugs that you want to drop? Talk about where the folks can find you and get in touch with you if they need to.
Well, yeah, you could visit my websites at whathasbeenwritten.com or ancientoccult.com, which links right to that. You can follow me on Instagram at whathasbeenwritten, somewhat of my main platform of social media, although I'm also on Twitter as Ancient Occult. And, that's what it's about, is just exalting the actual occult, all this stuff we're talking about, all these texts, how they all correlate, and all the substance in this, and the wisdom, and the knowledge, and the focus of, as Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa said, theology involved with magic. He basically, I use this quote a lot, but he says, if one is not learned in theology, he cannot understand the rationality of magic. This is the occult. But again, people turn it to a costume show. So that's one thing I'd like to depart with. You can follow me on these platforms. And I don't have an exact release date on Burial Magic, Ancient Necromancy Put to Practice, somewhat of an overview / grimoire on ancient necromancy, like we were talking before, how it's distinguished. And then, of course, Consecrated Evil, I look forward to. It's just I'm kind of playing it by ear as far as all the stuff I'm involved with and the releases. But I do plan to have them available on Amazon as ebooks, which you could get printed. People complain about that too, like this whole new thing with like how ebooks, you could just order them to be printed. But, the quality, this again illustrates how people, a lot of them, they just buy the books to take pictures of them and post it on their Instagram. They're not really reading the books much of the time. And that's one thing I also see, because a lot of these so-called occultists will post like the Black Arts, Richard Cavendish, or Levi, and all this stuff, but then they'll act like the Bible's just some Christian thing, where those occult books focus on the Bible as occultism. So you could see people aren't reading, or they're just missing it. And that's another thing, is I plan for my books, I'll close with this, the focus of the writings is raw. It's like the 1800s, just in the digital age. I'm not so focused on giving in. You get so many grammatical type of arguments that may hold people back from writing. I'm the first to tell you, grammar changes. If you study like the King James language of English compared to now, there's so much distinctions. In studying Koine Greek, I could tell you, with just all these things of like the Granville Sharp construction, or like an anarthrous preverbal predicate nominative, and John's got all this stuff, gets very subjective in a lot of places theologically. And so, at times with grammar, I'll just be like, this is how I'm doing it, and who's to say otherwise? That's what the occult's about. It's basically rebelling against dogmatism. I believe it's a Mortuary Drape lyric that says, no surrender to the dogma. And that's what it's about. Because you get this, whether it's religion like Christianity or history, science, it's just dogmatism. It just, they just give in to these trendy ways, and that, just puts a trap on people from thinking outside that box and discovering new knowledge. So,
yeah. So just like more like on a personal note, like, do you think, because I know that you have, you've debated Christians and stuff about these kind of things. Do you see that the orthodoxies like rush to take the supernatural and the occult out of the Bible is it hurting them? I think it's closing minds instead of opening them. What do you think about that?
Well, it just illustrates how they're a spiritually deprived religion, you know, and their focus is more just like insurance from like a hellfire idea and just like duping a bunch of people into that, which, by the way, if people have been duped in, you know, the Christian doctrine of hell, I recommend they see my article on my website entitled Turned into Hell, where I actually debate a Christian in there, and it didn't go well for him. But basically, yeah, you get to see these things are very occult. They're very esoteric. And like I said, Levi knew this and others and Crowley. And basically, like the Psalms, you know, the Psalms are a bunch of incantations and spells. And you could see this in Isaiah, where the NET Bible even admits that the Hebrew term used there, I think it's lakash, it's the word for incantations and amulet. Basically shrugging their shoulders out like, you know, this is the word for incantations put in a good light, and they translated prayers. Those are the Psalms, the prayers. This is spells, and it fits with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or the curse listings in Deuteronomy. So, yeah, they're holding themselves back from all this great knowledge and learning. And that's what the Bible says. Seek knowledge, seek wisdom, you know, like Apollo and Yahweh. And these notions, they just are blind to them. So, yeah, it's definitely a bad thing for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through my phase where I'm just like, F Christians and like forget about it. And like, but now, you know, maybe it's just a function of me getting old. Like I'm getting old. So maybe it's just like something like that. But now I'm just like, oh, I wish that they would understand more what their books say. Like, I wish they could understand that it's not a division. You know what I mean? So maybe I'm just becoming like a pacifist or something in my old age.
Well, it does get annoying a little. You know, some of the times they come with such a big mess that you got to call the janitor about, you know, with this stuff. And there's so many misapprehensions and red herrings and just straw man. It's just like, here we go again. But with people coming to debate me, by the way, just so you know, my comment sections on my platforms is not for them to come and make a mess with. When I debate, it's a clean form. It's like I say on my website, in my about section, I could be contacted through email, have a nice organized debate. That's the cloth I'm cut from going back years ago, where actual documentation. Because when people kind of just hit and run with like a debate and a comment like 20 other people and come and bombard me like I'm just supposed to clean all these messes up, you know, it's like, no, that's not how we're doing it. You email, we get it documented. If it's permission to post on the website, we could do it the proper way. But yeah, other than that, if Christians are just coming, of course, are going to oppose this kind of stuff. They reject the Bible, and that's what the Bible's all about.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for jumping in. You know, I had a scheduling snafu, and you agreed to come on at the last minute, and I really do appreciate that. And whenever your books, hey, no one can say anything about your books being postponed in the time of COVID-19. I would imagine a lot of people's schedules had to change in light of all this stuff. So when your books get you have a clearer understanding of when they might be available, please just reach out. You're welcome on here anytime at all. And I thank you so much for your time and your willingness to jump in and help me out with this.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me. I'd be glad to come back again.
Great. So, you want to throw out your websites one more time before I stop this thing, or what?
Well, yeah. I mean, whathasbeenwritten.com, ancientoccult.com, what has been written on Instagram, Ancient Occult on Twitter. I mean, I've even been posting stuff on TikTok lately as what has been written, getting a good amount of views. I mean, some people turn that, you know, a lot of people give in to like the trend of what these apps are supposed to be used for. These apps could be whatever we want them to be used for as content goes, you know. You don't have to give in to like, well, this app's for this and this for this. It's with me, it's more like, can I use that to get the occult out to people, like some kind of occultist, Jehovah's Witness knocking on the door? All right, let me see it. And that's what it's about for me. And if I could generate views and get the facts of the occult out, then, you know, I'm more than happy to.
Great. Well, keep fighting the good fight, man. I really do appreciate it. And thank you very much.
Take care.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Abercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Abercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Abercast. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I'm proud of the Abercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you could sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.